All right. Gonna give this a second here just so I can double check, make sure it is working before I go ahead and jump in for what I'm talking about today. Any second now. We'll see. Any second now. There we go. Okay. Wait. Hold on. Yep, there we go. Perfect. Okay, so what we're going to be talking about today is, well, most of everything. Like I said in the email, this is some FRQs we're going to walk through here together. I found ones that are publicly available from College Board, so I don't have to worry about sharing, stuff like that, any problems I might run into. That said, let's go ahead and jump into it here. Well, actually, better yet, first off, congratulations on graduation yesterday, all that. Really, really awesome. So, and it'll be a unique experience at the very least. All right. So first question here is going to be looking at a little bit of fiscal policy and how that's affecting the loanable funds market. So a lot of stuff going on there. So let's go ahead and get started. So assume the economy of Uchland is operating at full employment. The government of Uchland reduces the tax rate on household interest earnings. What will happen to private savings in Uchland is part A. So with this, just as the background to it, since it's operating at full employment, if we're thinking about this as an aggregate model, where does that mean we are? Where is it currently operating? That's right. It's going to be operating on the long run, most likely. They're operating efficiently. They don't have excessive unemployment or excessive inflation, anything like that. And reducing tax rate on household interest earnings. What kind of policy is that an example of? That's right. It's an example of expansionary fiscal policy. So, getting into this, let me get a text box here for part A. So A, what will happen to private savings in Uchland? So private savings, again, public and private. In our course, public is going to mean the government and what they're doing. Private is going to mean firms or citizens or whoever else it might be. So what's going to happen to private savings in Uchland as people's tax rates go down? Well, even if people keep the same, marginal propensity to consume and marginal propensity to save and all of that, what we're going to see is that there will be more money being saved. And if more money is being saved, what does that mean for private savings? That's right. Private savings will increase. So private savings will increase, go up, something like that. Now, that said, when we're talking about savings, what does that mean for the loanable funds market? What part of that loanable funds market is directly impacted by these savings? That's right. It's going to be the supply of loanable funds there. So go ahead and get a loanable funds market drawn out here. Our quantity of loanable funds. We have our real interest rate, RIR. All right, and then we have our upward sloping, which is what? It's the supply of loanable funds. And we have our downward sloping, which is our demand for loanable funds. All right, so that said, so we've got it correctly labeled. Now we need to show the effect of the change in private savings that we identified in Part A on the equilibrium real interest rate. So go ahead and start this off too by identifying the current equilibrium real interest rate. So we'll have it at A. Now we want to make sure we're getting it dotted out, stuff like that. Makes it very visible, easy to grade. Now, what's the change that we're seeing? Like I said, private savings is going up, And when we're talking about savings, that is the supply. That is the supply of loanable funds. So what does that mean then for the supply in this instance? That's right. It means it's going to increase. Because what's happening is since savings are up, that means banks have more money deposited in them. And as they have more money deposited in them, what can they do with that money? That's right. They can loan it out, create new loans, and so on and so forth. So we're going to see an increase in the supply of loanable funds. So we'll have our supply loanable funds to, remember, you got to make sure you differentiate between the two, with our new equilibrium here at point B. All right, get some arrows showing the shift, so they know which direction it's going in. So we've shown and we've drawn a correctly labeled graph and shown the effect of the change in private savings identified in part A on the equilibrium real interest rate. So something too that could help out with this, you might want to do interest rate like over here to actually better show that. Like you want to directly point it out, so you want to make sure you're getting a good display there. So like it'd be like R1 down to R2 to effectively get full points, because you're showing again the shift from one to the other, because it's directly asking about the equilibrium real interest rate, irrespective to the quantity of loanable funds. Now C, get to part C here, and this will be one where we can write out. So C. Given the real interest rate change identified in Part B, answer the following questions. So C, Part I. What is the short-run effect on aggregate demand? Explain. And again, we're focusing on the short run here because there are multiple things, I guess you could say, that will be resulting here. So, first thing that we're going to see with this change, and this is what we're focusing on for the question since it mentions the short run, is that aggregate demand will increase. So aggregate demand will increase. Now, it says to explain, so you need to make sure you put why. Why is it increasing? So aggregate demand will be increasing because there will be an increase because with the interest rates going down, there will be more borrowing and more investment. Aggregate demand will increase because with interest rates being down, there will be more investment. Because essentially, borrowing money is cheaper. And since borrowing money is cheaper, firms are more likely to, get that new factory, or, factory is a pretty extreme example, but get a new machine, get some new technology in there, something along those lines. And that's really the best reason based on the interest rate change, because that's all it's based on here. If we're getting back to the root of the question and it's talking about just the tax rate, aggregate demand would be increasing because people would have more money to spend and there'd be an increase in consumer spending. But since this is only talking about the real interest rate change, it will be the impact that it has directly on investment there. Interest, I need to type this out better, because with interest rates being down, there will be more investment. And then we get to part 2 of C here. So, no, it's not letting me type. Oh, hold on, let me get a new text box here. There we go. All right. So what is the long-run effect on potential real gross domestic product in Ushland? Explain. So now we're getting to those long-run implications of the policy that we talked about on Tuesday. So that said, what kind of changes in GDP or aggregate demand are we seeing in this problem? What part of it, of the 4 CIGX, is directly being impacted? It's investment, right? And when we're talking about long-run implications, investment is the part of GDP that matters. Now, since we're seeing an increase in investment then, and more companies are getting their factories, tractors, land, whatever it might be, what does that mean for potential real gross domestic product in Uchland in the long run then? That's right. It'll end up increasing. So, in the long run, potential real gross domestic, and you can shorten all this too, or you don't even necessarily need to go into this into detail. It's just, as you know, being clear and concise is incredibly important in all of this. So, in the long run, potential real gross domestic product will increase, and then we get to the explain there. So, should have a because, something along those lines, because you need to explain your viewpoint, explain your answer there. So, why will it increase? With investment increasing, what are they investing in? So, real GDP will increase because the increase in investment will lead to more capital, or something along those lines would be a great answer there. I mean, that's really the best way to put it. More capital, because there'll be more interest-sensitive investments, something along those lines. But capital is what it all comes back to. It's one of those 4 basic resources that we talk so much about, with capital being the one that promotes the most growth there. So, yeah, I mean, it could. I mean, if the question was more specific, there may be some kind of angle with technology, but it's not. So that's where we'll leave it here with this question. Let me just make sure there's no questions in chat. All right. So let's go ahead and move to our next question here. Again, I'm planning on doing 3. I might do more if time ends up permitting. So get this cleared off. New. Don't save. All right. Where are we? Here we go. Okay. So this will be the next one. There's a lot of stuff here, really good stuff here with PPC, potential growth, unemployment, and the like. All right. So get this cropped. Crop, and then expand. Oh, there we go. So again, and these are the short questions still. We're not on one of the big questions, which I do have at least one of those planned for today here. So, countries face trade-offs between producing consumer and capital goods. Country X takes 1 hour to produce a unit of consumer goods and 2 hours to produce a unit of capital goods. Country Y takes 2 hours to produce a unit of consumer goods and 4 hours to produce a unit of capital goods. Which country has the comparative advantage in the production of consumer goods? So here's that comparative advantage. You know, again, one of those really tricky concepts that has a good amount of math behind it. So let's go ahead and get this laid out here as far as what we can expect. So see if I can get a text box here to lay out the basic format that I want. So part A, we have country X and country Y. Further, let me get this a little bit down. And we have, let's see, we have our capital goods. And a little bit more space, capital goods. And we have our consumer goods. Oh, there we go. Now, capital goods, it takes country X 1 hour to produce a single unit of 1 hour to produce a single unit of consumer goods and 2 hours to produce a unit of capital goods. So capital goods, it's 2 hours. Better yet, I'm going to put this as a 2 so I don't get this too confused here. And then consumer goods, 1 hour. 1 hour. All right. A little space there, otherwise it'll drive me nuts. Okay, and then country Y takes 2 hours to produce a unit of consumer goods and 4 hours to produce a unit of capital goods. So 4 hours and then 2 hours over here. So I think you guys are probably seeing what I'm seeing here, which is that we probably don't need to end up doing any math at all. So with that laid out, and again, that's not what the question's asking, but something like this is very much helpful to get this written out on the side of the paper. That's what I'm trying to simulate here. So that said, it's asking who has the comparative advantage. Now, we had the two types of advantage. We had absolute and comparative. If this was asking about absolute advantage, this would be a little trickier, I guess, or maybe not trickier depending on how you look at it. So absolutes, it's just looking at whoever can strictly produce more. And in this case, who is it that would have the absolute advantage in capital goods? The country X, because it takes them less time to make capital goods. And then again, absolute advantage for consumer goods, who would have absolute advantage? Again, it'd be country X because it takes them less time. But since we're looking at comparative advantage, we're looking at who has less of an opportunity cost. So with this, I mean, another way of putting this, we could all put this into the base of 4 hours. So over the course of 4 hours, how many goods can, if we're talking about absolute advantage here, it's irrelevant for comparative advantage. But, we look at the ratios between them. And with both of them, it's the same exact thing. Each country here produces half of the amount of capital goods that they do consumer goods, meaning that they have the same what? The same opportunity cost. So, for this then, if they wanted to produce one consumer good in country X, they would have to end up giving up half of a capital good. Or if they, wanted to produce one capital good, they would have to give up 2 consumer goods, and it'd be the same ratio here. So since it's asking who has a comparative advantage in production of consumer goods, you would say neither country has a comparative advantage in the production of consumer goods. And then again, it says explain, and then you get to the because. So the because then is you talking about the work that you've just done. So again, over the course of 2 hours, right? If you're doing 2 hours, again, it's relative here. So country X, if they wanted to make one capital good, they'd have to give up 2 consumer goods. Or if they wanted to make one capital good in country Y, they'd have to give up 2 consumer goods again, because they have the same opportunity cost to produce their goods. So, and that would be a solid answer for that. Now, moving past that, we have to then look at their labor market here in country X. So it's not super related to the first part of the question, but it is asking really good stuff here. So let me just widen this out here a bit. So B, calculate the unemployment rate in country X. So for calculating the unemployment rate, what is it that we have to do? What are we comparing here? We've got a bunch of information, at least one red herring, for calculating the unemployment rate. So what we have to do is we need to look at how many people are unemployed and look at the labor force. And then completely exclude, for the unemployment rate, we need to exclude the people that are not in the workforce, or not in the labor force. So what is the labor force in this scenario then? So labor force is employed plus unemployed. So in this case, it'd be 180,000 plus 10,000 plus 5,000 plus 5,000, giving us 200,000. So labor force equals 200,000. And then we need to figure out the unemployed people. How many people are unemployed? Well, it's 10,000 plus 5,000 plus 5,000, so giving us 20,000. So unemployed equals 20,000. Now, in order to get where we need to go, how is it that we figure out what the unemployment rate is? That's right. We divide the unemployment rate by the labor force, and then multiply it by 100. So it would be 20,000 divided by, let me see if I can find the divided by symbol. If there even is one, actually, I don't know. We'll just do a slash. 20,000 over 200,000, and then multiply that by 100, which will end up, if you really want to do the math, I mean, you could simplify this here, and it'd be 2 divided by 20, which is 1 divided by 10, right, giving us 0.1, and then 0.1 times 100 equals, it ends up being 10%. 10%. Oh, no. 10%. There we go. Giving us 10%. So we have a 10% unemployment rate in country X. And again, it does say show your work. So if it says show your work, you need to be making sure you're writing out something like this here. Actually, in order to save space, I'll put this back up because we do have another graph that we have to end up drawing here. Now, next part, we need to calculate the labor force participation rate. And this is going to be a similar concept. So we already know what the labor force is. We need to figure out the population of country X, though. We need to figure out what the population is. So the population of country X is going to be the labor force plus the not in the labor force, giving us, that's right, 300,000. Now, in order to get there, then, what do we have to do? How do we figure out how many people are actually participating in this labor force here? What kind of math would we end up doing? That's right. So you would take the labor force of 200,000, divide it by 300,000, the total population. Much like the last, we multiply it by 100 there at the end. And again, same concept as last time. You can simplify it if you want. Ultimately, it goes down to 2 over 3, which is like 66.6 repeating, or 0.6666, and so on and so forth repeating. Ultimately giving you, 66.6%. And that is a labor force participation rate. Labor force participation rate. There you go. All right, so that's pretty good for part C there. Again, it says show your work, so you definitely want to be writing all of this out. They are, starting to crack down on that for AP Macro. So it's a really, really valuable thing to be doing. All right, and part D, our graph. So draw a correctly labeled graph of the production possibilities curve for country X with consumer goods on the horizontal axis and capital goods on the vertical axis. Indicate a point on your graph, label Z, that reflects the current level of unemployment. So there's a lot going on in this one, and I really, really like this question here, part D. So let's, well, I don't need it. Anyway, so let's go ahead and get this drawn out here. So it's asking for a production possibilities curve. So we got this. Where do they want what? So consumer goods on the horizontal axis. So again, horizontal, like the horizon's going across. So consumer goods down here. Consumer goods, meaning that our capital goods are going to be over here. Capital goods be over here. All right. And then what does a production possibilities curve look like? I mean, there are multiple ways, but our most basic looking one will be, as the name implies, a curve. So it could be something like this. Could be a straight line if you want. I like doing it curved. It's easier to draw. It's not a straight line, so it ends up being a little bit cleaner. All right. So this would be the correctly labeled part of it, and you would get 1 point for having this all, well, no, you'd still need Z correctly labeled probably. So, that said, all right, no, it's separated, so you would get 1 point for for correctly labeling all this. So anyways, indicate a point on your graph labeled Z that reflects the current level of unemployment. So it's asking you to show this on here on your PPC, and how is it that would end up looking? So in some ways, a little bit of a trick. So when we're talking about full employment or natural rate of unemployment, there is one of the types of unemployment that is not included. And what type of unemployment is that? That's right, it's cyclical unemployment. So if you ever have cyclical unemployment, that means you're not operating on or at this natural rate of unemployment. Meaning that we're not going to be operating on the line here, because again, when it's cyclically unemployed, it's in some way related to the business cycle. Again, like with what we're having right now, it's not that businesses magically started being unprofitable. It's not like their business models were out of date. It's just that people don't have money to buy it, or they literally can't in a lot of cases, something like that, and it's no fault of the businesses themselves. So there is cyclical unemployment, meaning that we're not fully efficient. So if we're not overextended, then that means we're going to be operating, or we're not efficient, rather. We're not going to be operating on the line. Now, there's two different spots where it could be then if we're not on the line. It could be either inside the curve or outside the curve. Now, what does it mean if it's outside the curve? So if we were operating perhaps like out here, and this won't be a right answer, but if we're operating out here, it means that we're producing way too much stuff. This is unattainable by any means, really. Like if it was, closer about back here, it'd be overextended, perhaps, right? We have people working in jobs that they're not suited to, something like that. If it was on the curve again, it'd be efficient. But where we're at is going to be in here, and it says to label that Z. All right, so that's where we'd be operating, because we're currently not at full employment. We're not at our natural rate of unemployment, meaning that we're not effectively using our resources, therefore making us inefficient. And all it says is to draw this out and indicate a point. So you would be good with what is displayed here. I mean, obviously you wouldn't want these three, but if it was all of this, these 3 points excluded, we'd be good. So give you guys a second to look at that question. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll move to one of the big FRQs. All right, get this cleared off. All right, where are we? I think there we go, this one right here. So this is going to be, you will expect to have one of, actually, wow, I didn't realize there's foreign exchange in this. Let me see if the big one in this has a good, yeah, there's a lot of foreign exchange in here too. Well, let me see. I think there's only one part in here shoot, that's poor planning on my part. Let me see if, I'll go back to AP Macro FRQs. Past exam questions, 2016. Response questions. Let me see, no policy. So we got Phillips curve again, Fed, open market, gross domestic product, trading partners. Yeah, the thing is with the big ones, there's almost always some kind of something to do with foreign exchange, because it really ends up, I think this might be a good one here. All right, we will do this one then. Print screen. Oh, Jason, hey, what's up? Go to AP Macro 2020 sample questions. Let me see. AP Macro 2020 sample questions. Okay. There we go. This should be good. Oh, look at this. Good call, Jason. Appreciate that. All right. So yeah, this is really good. Are these? Oh, wait, sample 2. Long question. Oh, okay. Interesting. That's really long. Okay. We'll try to find something here quickly then that doesn't or isn't, or is rather, something that will be, we haven't talked about. All right. National gross domestic product, real GDP, food. So this is actually a question that they've used before, at least this graph anyway. I recognize that. Different questions though. Yeah, we'll do this long question here. This looks good. Oh wait, no, that's delete from screen. There we go. This is very long though. Control V. Select. That's really, really long. All right. Yeah, it even says part K, so we'll get that off here. Crop, and then let me see if this will actually display past my picture. I mean, you guys, again, let me see. Just a second. Get this expanded. All right, here, I'll shrink down my picture, because again, it's not super, super important. There we go. Okay. So using a correctly labeled graph, correctly labeled aggregate supply and demand graph, show the impact of a sudden large decrease in private investment spending on each of the following. Output, price level, and C, using the results, explain how employment is affected. This part of the question could not be asked in current form. Students are not required to draw graphs, yeah. All right, so let's see here. So part A, all of this is essentially in the same spot, so we'll just draw this out. So draw out a correctly labeled aggregate model. So we'd get this. Down at the bottom, this would be labeled real GDP, output, something like that. So RGDP. Over on the side, it's going to be price level. And then we have our three lines on this. We would have our vertical one, our upward sloping, and our downward sloping. So I probably could have drawn that a little bit better, but oh well. So downward sloping is going to be aggregate demand. Upward sloping will be our SRAS, our short run aggregate supply. And then our vertical line will be our LRAS, our long run aggregate supply. So using a correctly labeled aggregate supply and aggregate demand graph, show the impact of a sudden large decrease in private investment spending on each of the following. A, output, B, price level, and then C, using the results in part A, explain how employment is affected. So, large decrease in private investment spending. What is that going to end up impacting on here? And it's going to show the impact of it's sudden, so we're just looking at the super short run right now, and we're not worrying about the long run implications, presumably. So investment, where is investment reflected on this graph? How do we see investment, a change in investment here? That's right, it's going to end up impacting the aggregate demand, because again, aggregate demand is just a fancy way of saying GDP. And investment's one of the four parts of GDP there. Now, it could be, this will end up impacting, like, later on down the road, obviously. It would have long-run implications because investment does, but I'm assuming, since it's focusing on the sudden bit, it's just right now. So, it's going to be a decrease in private investment spending, and since it's a decrease in investment, that means it's a decrease in aggregate demand. So we would go from aggregate demand 1 to aggregate demand 2. Now, that's the shift itself. Again, it wouldn't ask you to graph this and expect you to get a grade for that part, but I mean, it still kind of could end up happening. Like, it could ask what would happen to output and price level in response to that. So we would be going from point A to point B down here. So we're going to be going from price level 1 to, let's see here, so we got price level and output's what it's asking for. Get these labeled out here. So A, we have price level 1 and price level 2. And then we have output 1, I'll just do O1, and output 2. Draw arrows to show the shift. So let's see, we need to just show it. So we've shown that what's happening to output, we're showing that output is decreasing. by having the arrows and sequentially labeling them. Price level. We have price level labeled as well with arrows showing the change, and this should be good enough for full points here. And then C, using the results in Part A, explain how employment is affected. So let's go ahead and write that out. So C. Now, again, we were talking about this as we went through the course. Price level and real GDP, they're also indicative of other things. So as price level's going up and down, it's the same thing as inflation effectively going up and down. And real GDP in general is a way of saying employment in a lot of ways, or not necessarily, but it's a good indicator of it. So we can assume then that as real GDP is going down, that employment is going down. So there'd be two ways to really word Part C then, which could either be that either employment is decreasing, and it doesn't say explain or anything like that, so that would be a right answer, or unemployment is increasing. The safer bet obviously being employment is decreasing, less people are employed, something along those lines. Would be good. All right. So, next part of this question. And I'm going to drag this out. There we go. So we have more space. Okay. I could have just kept this. Oh, well. All right. So, next part of this. Identify one specific fiscal policy that might be implemented to offset the effects of the decrease in investment, and explain how the policy would affect each of the following in the short run. So let's see here. So there's been a large decrease in private investment spending. And then it's at, okay. So there's the two types of fiscal policy that we want to see, or would be helpful here. And both have different implications for interest rates, though I don't know if this question's that deep. Well, actually, no, it is. It specifically mentions real interest rates. So yes, it is. So Part D. That's weird. It's weird. This isn't necessarily a question that'd be asked in this manner, because it's asking you to... All right, anyways, regardless. So there's the two types of fiscal policy. There's either changes in taxes or changes in spending. And then there's the other two types, which are contractionary and expansionary. And we'll start with expansion, or the contractionary or expansionary here. So we're currently operating at a recession in Part B. And since we're in a recession, will we implement expansionary or contractionary? That's right, we would implement expansionary. Now, for spending and increase in taxes, what is it then that we would do to them to help expand the economy? So, there's the two options. So for spending, you either increase or decrease spending. So it could either be an increase in spending, or what would you do with taxes to ensure that people have more money? Increase in spending, or decrease in taxes. Now, since this is talking about interest rates, one of these is going to be a better answer, because they both have different implications. Now, this is all in a vacuum, of course, so I'm sure it doesn't really matter. But these are going to have different impacts on potential tax rates, because of crowding out, really. So the better answer is going to be a decrease in taxes. Bold that as well. A decrease in taxes. Again, it's because of those implications that they have for interest rates. Because if there's going to be an increase in spending, again, and it's probably not going to go this far into it, but if there's going to be an increase in spending, it's kind of implied that there's going to be more borrowing on the government's part, ultimately driving interest rates up. So decrease in taxes is probably going to be the better answer there. Anyways, let's get to it here. So we're going to go with the decrease in taxes. So the government's going to decrease taxes. We need to actually answer Part D now, and show what'll happen there. So it's just selection. It's not a text box. So decrease in taxes. Now, what'll happen to aggregate demand as a result of this decrease in taxes? That's right. Aggregate demand. I can take off the bold and underline now. AD. Oh, it's still going to show me some underlines, but I suppose... Oh, no, still doing it. There we go. Aggregate demand will increase. And it says explain how the policy would affect each of the following. AD will increase because people will have more money to spend. So there'll be higher consumer spending. Because, I mean, I'm assuming it's just you're explaining the impact on these, not necessarily them themselves. But we'll do it anyway. So AD will increase because people can spend more, and interest rates and savings will increase. And savings will increase, meaning that interest rates will go down. Again, it's probably too in-depth there, but it is right, so it definitely can't hurt. E, output and the price level. So as aggregate demand increases here, we kind of already have this graphed out for part A, or the first part of this question, honestly, just part A. So we're essentially going to be going back from B to A, so we can kind of look at the opposite change here. So as the aggregate demand is increasing, output will increase because a decrease in tax, it might not necessarily be a decrease in personal taxes or income taxes. It could be business taxes, something like that. Something along those lines. It just depends. So output will increase and price level will increase. Price level will increase because as people have more money or businesses have more money, people have more jobs, meaning they can spend money better, meaning that they're actually buying stuff like that. As there's more money being spent. And then F, real interest rates. So real interest rates will be going down. So real interest rates going down. We already touched on that in the first part. So real interest rates will go down, or will go down. Because, and I'll draw it out here quickly in a second in case you missed one of the earlier questions. Because there will be more money being saved. Yeah, well, that's enough. That's sufficient explanation. So I'll just quickly draw that out in case you guys weren't here for one of the earlier questions. So we have, this will be a loanable funds market. So vertical axis is going to be the real interest rate. Horizontal axis will be the quantity of loanable funds. We have our supply and demand, upward sloping in supply on every graph except for the graph for the bonds market. Supply of loanable funds, demand for loanable funds. And when people have more money, if they're going to keep the same marginal propensity to save or consume, what that means is that there's going to be more money being spent because essentially their paychecks are larger, right? So if they were saving 20%, that 20% is now going to be larger, and there's now a higher supply of loanable funds. So it'd be an increase here. There we go. Because real interest rate would be going down with this. So real interest rate would go down. Now, the reason why I'm saying that this would end up being a better fix than necessarily increased spending, it's because of the original decrease in private investment spending. It's the best response to that specifically because it's directly going to have the impact on interest rates that they want. The other option with this, again, is if we were going to increase spending, what would end up happening is that we'd either see that increase in demand for loanable funds or decrease in supply of loanable funds, giving us an increased real interest rate, which, while the initial effect would be just as good at fixing the problem, it's the implications past that initial effect where it gets questionable. Because if businesses aren't already investing, they're not going to start investing now because interest rates are higher. So something to think about there. All right, get that cropped out. Oh, no, not that. Oopsie daisy. We'll cut that. Cut that. There we go. Okay. So that is that chunk of the question. Now, we're going to go ahead and look at the other side of things. We're going to look at what it is that the Fed, or in this case just a central bank, might be able to do to offset the effects of this decrease in investment, and explain how it would affect all of the stuff here. So for this part then, get another text box. So there's a decrease in investment, meaning that the Fed, it has a lot more directive control over interest rates than the government does. You know, again, it's when it's fiscal policy, interest rates are a side effect. When it's monetary policy, it's what they're directly trying to influence here with the money market and the like. So better yet, I'll get a money market drawn out here first just to help visualize this as I'm talking about it. So we have our money market, and I realize I could probably use a text box for this, but no, well, money market. So here we have our vertical, we have our downward sloping. On the left-hand side here, we have nominal interest rates. On the bottom, we have the quantity of money. Now, our vertical line is going to be money supply, and our downward sloping is going to be money demand. All right. Now that I got that drawn out, now we'll jump into actually identifying this open. Oh, it specifically says open market operation. All right, that's good. That is good. All right. So we'd identify an open market operation that the central bank would implement to offset the effects of the decrease in investment. So in order to encourage investment then, what is it that needs to happen to the interest rates? How is it that we get businesses to start borrowing again or borrowing more? That's right. It'd be you'd want to end up decreasing the interest rate because it's less of a risk. It's this, like, housing is included in investment as well. If you're going to buy a home, you're going to take out a $300,000 loan, you're going to be a lot more likely to do it at like a 2.5% interest rate than you are at like a 5% interest rate. That's a huge deal with the amount of time that you're going to be paying it off. 2.5% isn't a lot, but over 30 years, that is a lot. And it's the same thing for businesses, So they're going to be more likely to borrow as the interest rate is lower. So what is it then that needs to happen to the money supply to make interest rates go down? Do we want to decrease or increase the money supply? That's right. We will want to increase it, meaning we want to shift it to the right here. So we want to move this money supply over to like money supply 2, something like that. We want to get down here and lower the nominal interest rate. And if we're talking about open market operations, again, that's buying and selling bonds. Which one is it that the Fed would want to do in order to get there? The central bank, and it says central bank, so it's best to keep with the wording central bank. The central bank would do what? That's right, they would buy bonds. So the central bank would buy bonds. And again, the wording there gets kind of confusing. So when they're buying the bonds, that means the Fed is buying bonds from people, banks, whatever it is, giving them money for their pieces of paper, essentially, for they're paying off their loan, something like that, you could say. Again, they might offer better rates than what the bond would offer, if they'd waited out the full duration. They might offer enough to where the bank would be like, hey, this is a really good deal. I might get more if I wait another 15 years, but at this point, I've already gotten a pretty good amount, something along those lines. So the central bank would buy bonds. Now, let's go ahead and look at how this would affect each of the following here. So we're actually splitting it up this time. So part G, real interest rates. So how is it then that real interest rates would be affected as a result of this? So as nominal interest rate goes down, it's going to end up decreasing the real interest rate as well. Why is that? How do you find the real interest rate, I guess you could say? So the real interest rate is going to be the nominal interest rate minus inflation. So if the nominal interest rate is going down, that means there's less of a number that's subtracting that inflation. For example, If the nominal interest rate is 10% and inflation is 5%, the real interest rate is 5%. Now, if the nominal interest rate is now only 6% and inflation is 5%, it's only 6 minus 5, giving you 1%. So real interest rates are down. And again, it's asking you to explain. So it'd be summing up essentially what I just said. Because as nominal rates go down, there's less real as well, something like that. Because as nominal rates go down, there's lower real rates. There we go. Or because of the formula, something like that. Or because, let's see, NIR, that's RIR. NIR minus inflation leads to lower real rates. Something along those lines. Again, it's probably not expected just because of the way it's worded, but it's good to talk through it now. Then we got part E. Aggregate demand. What would happen to aggregate demand? So again, this is an expansionary policy. Oh, that's spelled lower wrong there. All right. So it is an expansionary policy. As the Fed's buying bonds, there's more money in the market. Businesses are investing more, stuff like that. So aggregate demand will increase. So aggregate demand will increase. Because of higher rates of investment. People are going to be investing more because interest rates are lower, meaning that they're paying back less money over time, stuff like that. Higher rates of investment due to lower interest rates. There we go. That's good. And then output and price level. Let's see here. So output and price level. So again, it's going to be pretty much the same thing as the last question. So we could probably word it a little bit differently this time, maybe. No, not really. But yeah, so output will be increasing and price level will also be increasing. Again, it's moving back from B to A pretty much because it's expansionary. So, I mean, another way to word it, unlike we worded it last time, as aggregate demand shifts to the right, output increases, and price level increases as well. Something along those lines. I mean, again, there's not too much more to it than that. And then, if the central bank continues the open market operation identified, explain the long-run effects on each of the following. So this is the one where a part of the question we ended up cutting off, but that's okay, because it was talking about foreign exchange. So it's asking, essentially, what are the long-run implications of this? Now, as there's more and more money, so like, say we get back up to point A from this, we're now operating here. If, we do this for another year or however long it is, we're going to end up shifting this aggregate demand further to the right, meaning that we'd be operating maybe about here, something like that, meaning that our output's higher, but what else is higher? Our price level as well, that's right. So the price level would be pretty far up there as well. And as the price level's up, I mean, essentially that's a fancy way of saying inflation, especially once we start relating this back to the Phillips curve. Or in general, I mean, that's pretty much the stereotypical example of inflation, or most people's basic understanding of it, which is that if there's more of a money supply, then there's more inflation. So if continued, inflation will increase. Because there'll be more and more investment with companies, people paying back lower interest rates, stuff like that. So essentially more easy money is one of the ways of saying it. So something like that. If continued inflation will increase. All right, so it looks good there. I'm just going to quickly check to see if there's anything else that we haven't really covered today that might be on an FRQ. I'm going to see if there's anything with the Phillips curve specifically. No. Let me see, because like a lot of the Phillips curve stuff ends up being in the big questions and ends up being related then back to foreign policy because of that. Japan. That's disappointing. I mean, because like usually when I'm able to do this myself without having to worry about, maybe make sure there's none here. I can search by like the question type and it'll show me what, like all the questions that are related to the Phillips curve. Your TikTok is blowing up. Oh man, did you make some really funny TikToks lately, Leah? I'm just looking at these over and over again. Let me try this. Control F, Phillips. No. Oh, no. All right. AP macro, FRQs. Yeah, I'm just going to try to click through one or two more years here and see if I can find a good one on the Phillips curve, because I didn't manage to find any yet. Phillips. Oh, no. Oh, here we go. All right, this will be a good one then. Yes, we'll run with this. All right, print screen, clear this off. And this will be the last one that we do here with the Phillips curve. All right, so inflation and expected inflation are important determinants of economic activity. Draw a correctly labeled graph of a short-run Phillips curve. Say I posted a challenge then. Wow, that's really impressive. Congratulations on that. That's a lot of views, a lot of followers. All right. So A, draw a correctly labeled graph of a short-run Phillips curve. So again, the Phillips curve is the comparison between inflation and unemployment. So draw this out, and it's only asking for the short run here, interestingly. It's not asking for the long run. So again, Phillips curve is downward sloping. And it is usually, like, unlike our other ones, it is curved. So here's kind of a curve. So this will be the short run SRPC. We want to get our bottom labeled here with unemployment. And then on the other side over here, we want to get inflation labeled out. So unemployment versus inflation, again, that's what the Phillips curve is a comparison of. All right, so draw a correctly labeled graph of the short-run Phillips curve. That is a correctly labeled graph of a short-run Phillips curve. Using your graph in part A, show an increase in the expected rate of inflation. So, if there's an increase in the increase in the expected rate of inflation, again, expectations are just as important as things happening themselves. So people expecting high inflation is just as bad of a thing as the inflation would be in and of itself. So, that said, what does that end up meaning for us? So if people are expecting inflation to be high, it means that what am I trying to say here? If people are expecting inflation to be high, it means they're going to treat it just as if inflation will be high, meaning that there's going to be higher interest rates. And if there's higher interest rates, what is it that we're going to start seeing here? So it'd be a change in aggregate demand, most likely. I'm going to look this one up just to make sure. FRQ. Just to make sure. because I'm assuming it'll be a change in aggregate demand as a result of that, but I could be wrong. What year is this? 13. Okay. Oh, paint. All right. Yeah. So ultimately, because of that. Wait, I already answered that. Is that the challenge one? Oh. Okay. So yeah, so it'll be the same thing. And with this, because investment's going to be decreasing, the short-run aggregate supply would be decreasing following the aggregate demand there. And again, the Phillips curve ends up mirroring what we see in the aggregate model. So it would end up shifting the short-run Phillips curve to this way, SRPC, shifting it over here. All right, using your graph in part A, okay, yeah, so we're on part C now. What is the effect of the increase in the expected inflation rate in the long-run Phillips curve? So the expected inflation rate for the long-run Phillips curve, it shouldn't have any effect at all. Because the long run's not really concerned with short run fluctuations. Again, short run fluctuations are more so to do with the business cycle than anything else. So if there ends up being like changes in employment, things of that nature, it's not going to be. I mean, the concept of the long run's a lot more related to unemployment in general. So the long run would remain stagnant throughout this. So for C, then it would be C. C. The long run Phillips curve. I see what else. Sorry. Curve remains the same. And again, it's because it's again more so related to unemployment. And also, we're looking at short-run fluctuations here, year to year, whereas the long run is what we're capable of doing most all of the time outside of that. Given the increase in the expected inflation rate from Part B, will the nominal interest rates on new loans increase, decrease, or remain unchanged? So let's get this right now here. So DI. So, will nominal interest rates on loans increase, decrease, or remain unchanged? So again, like I was saying, the threat of inflation is just as bad as inflation itself. So if next year banks are expecting inflation to be 10%, if they still want to make a profit, what do they have to do to interest rates? Will do what? They'll increase, right? Because if it's 5% from one year, and now their rates on their rates on loans are 5%, but all of a sudden, oh my gosh, inflation next year is going to be 10%. What's going to happen? They're going to start having to charge at least 10%, so they'll probably change their 5% to 12% or 13% or something like that, meaning that nominal interest rates will end up increasing because they want to make sure that they're not just bleeding money over the next however long. Now, that said, real rates, though, what's going to... Oh, there you go, just 2 I's. There we go. Real interest rates, though, what will happen with them? And again, when we're talking about expectations, changes in the expected rate of inflation, we're going to assume that it is going to end up happening, right? So, what will end up happening to real interest rates? So, we're essentially going to assume that businesses want to end up making the same level of profit, right? And that all of this expected inflation ends up being the actual inflation, and it ends up being the actual inflation, and because of that, real interest rates will remain unchanged. Again, because the real is adjusted for the fluctuations in the economy, because it's that nominal minus the real. So if banks were making 2% interest every year with their 5% rates, because inflation was at 3%, then they'd end up charging 12% if inflation was 10% or something like that. So in this idealistic scenario, it's going to end up being that they're unchanged. And then part E. Assume that the nominal interest rate is 8%. Borrowers and lenders expect the rate of inflation to be 3%. The growth rate of real gross domestic product is 4%. Calculate the real interest rate. So what first sticks out in this question, there is a red herring here, obviously. One of these things is not relevant to the question, which is the growth rate of real gross domestic product. Because again, real interest rate is just nominal minus inflation. So in recent years, again, they expect you to show your work, so we'll go ahead and show our work here. So the real would be the nominal. In this case, it'd be 8 nominal minus the rate of inflation, so 3. And putting percent signs here wouldn't be the worst idea. So 8% minus 3%. And using our basic math skills here, we get a whopping total of 5%. So the real interest rate then would be 5%. All right. For the most part, I think I covered all the big topics we might see here today. Let me see. Yeah, so one thing, I actually would have lost points on this now that I'm looking back at it, because I wouldn't have differentiated between my short-run Phillips curves, so make sure you're doing that. Yes, I do remember that there, Jason. I will make a TikTok in the event that you successfully get a 5. I'll be keeping an eye on the scores. So, yeah, I'm rooting for you. Rooting for that 5 still. So that promise aside, I don't think there's too much else to say other than I'm sure you guys will do great. It's don't forget, open book, open note. So if there's any gaps in your information, definitely have it written down on a note card, piece of paper, something nearby. Leah, you're going to apologize in advance for your score. I'm sure you'll do just fine. Since I should drop my IG. Well, technically the school year's not over, so yeah. But I don't have one of those Instagrams. I don't really keep much social media myself. I'm not a big fan. But anyway, I'm sure you guys will do fine. That said, unless you guys have any further questions here or statements, I will be closing this off and wishing you guys the best, and of course the best for the coming years ahead of you with college and the like. So, all right. Again, good luck. Use your resources on the test, because this is a very unique opportunity, and yes, I miss being in the classroom, definitely. It would have been nice to have given you guys a proper send-off and the like, but unfortunately it is what it is, and I guess you guys will have a very unique story going into the future as far as high school graduations goes. So, class of 2020, I'll hopefully talk to you guys later. If I can figure out how to shut this down. There we go.